This is Anarchast.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I have coming in from just outside of Birmingham in the UK, Carlos Andres. He writes the Frontier Research Report and he does a lot of other different things, and he also sort of expatriated, or he lives now at least, in Uruguay, and a very interesting guy, and very happy to have you on. Thanks, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. And first question we ask everybody, how did you become an anarchist?
That's a good question. It's funny, I don't particularly use the anarcho-capitalist word or phrase to describe myself, although I certainly am one. I just, and that's not because of any particular aversion, but I just, to be honest, I'm just becoming familiar with the term, despite the fact that I fit the definition perfectly. I would say I became one without really knowing it early on in life. I'd say, in my mid-teens. When I began to ask the question, how does the world really work? And that question had to do with how does the economic world work? I was born and raised in an entrepreneurial household, and involved in a lot of business activity early in life, and mentored by my father in that regard. And so that sort of set me on a course to asking, pondering questions both within the context of business activity, but also on a broader scale. Began to think about how does the big broader business picture work around the world, and that sort of led me into I would say the realm of the anarcho-capitalist fold, because obviously the explanations of the world around me, the mainstream sort of economic viewpoints and things like that, weren't quite cutting it when you look at them closely. And so that led me to investigate further, and that eventually led me to the Austrian School of Economics, and led me to get an education in economics and that kind of thing.
That's interesting. I sort of followed the exact same path. I think many people who are entrepreneurial very quickly sort of realize that the government does nothing except for hinder you and take your money and cause you all sorts of problems and make it very hard for you to do almost anything. And so starting off as an entrepreneur, I think you kind of quickly start to realize that what government's all about right from there, and then from there you can decide, you can go either way. You can be more like us and try to get away from those sort of things, try to avoid it, or just try not to have that in our lives so much. Or you can go the other way, the more fascist way, the more like Warren Buffett, and really tie yourself into them and use them and get all their favors and try to succeed that way in the business world, which of course a lot of people have done as well. But yeah, definitely having an entrepreneurial background helps you to see the world around you. And then, like you said, it led you to looking at the grander big picture of the whole world and the economy. And that, of course, leads you down a big rabbit hole towards central banks and that sort of thing.
That's right. That's right. You read all the classics, the Creature from Jekyll Island and all that stuff. And you get, introduced to the whole world of the mechanics of how not only the economy works, but how the different actors and stakeholders behave within that context. And that includes governments and bankers and, entrepreneurs, the whole cast of characters that make up an economy. And that's includes the good and the bad.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that central bankers are a part of the economy, but they are.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, well, they don't do anything positive for anyone except for people who have control of those banks and basically can print up as much money as they want and give it to their friends is basically how it works.
That's right. Well, that's right. And what I struggle with but grapple with is, how best to communicate that in simple terms, communicate these economic ideas in simple terms. I think, in a lot of ways, people intuitively can pick up on the fact that things are broken and that something's wrong. And they pick up on the fact that, despite what governments say, they're not all about, the welfare and the well-being of their people. I think people can intuitively pick up on these kinds of things. But in pursuing the question further, most folks don't quite know how to sort of disentangle the ball of yarn. And so, I find myself wishing and wanting and to find ways to communicate these ideas in very clear fashion.
Yeah, that's their big hope central banks is that people never really figure out what they do, and that's why they've for a long time the Federal Reserve, hardly anyone even knew what it was or that they even existed, and it's only really been in the last 10 years, thanks to the internet, that a lot more people have started to look into it, and they don't really like what they see. And a great book that you brought up it's probably one of the first economics books I ever read was The Creature from Jekyll Island. I don't know how I came across that as one of the first ones, but that's really eye-opening to see how it all was formed and how secretive it was.
That's right. And the book can seem like it's, depending on your mindset, it can seem like it's sort of from the lunatic fringe, but once you dig into it, you realize a lot of the arguments and the information presented is very sound, very rational, very logically put together.
Yeah, and I'm sure Ben Bernanke is not enjoying his regular nationally broadcast interviews recently. They much prefer to stay in the shadows because they really don't have anything to say other than they're going to continue to manipulate the economy and basically make everything worse with all the things they're doing, even though I'm not even sure if they even realize they are doing that. Do you think Ben Bernanke thinks he's actually helping the economy by keeping interest rates artificially at 0%?
No, I don't think. Well, he might try to believe it. I'm sure he tries to persuade himself that that things might hopefully turn out all right. But I think he knows enough about economics to know that they're barking down, they're going down the wrong path. But they're committed now, right? So to go backwards is to admit that they've done something so horrendously bad that there would be consequences and repercussions for that, criminal even. I think they've all like sort of committed a crime together, and so going backwards is just impossible.
Yeah, I think when Alan Greenspan got out, he had good timing, and I think he's quite a bit smarter in my estimation than Ben Bernanke. He actually used to hang out with Ayn Rand, and he used to basically be a gold bug, and so I think he saw what's coming and that this whole system is going to be collapsing, and he passed the ball off to poor Ben Bernanke, and he's got to sit there.
I agree there that they are, in terms of intellectual, dynamic. I think Alan Greenspan is several cuts above Ben Bernanke for sure. He's got the great essay that he wrote back in 1966, and Ayn Rand included it in the foreword of her book. I think it's called Gold and Economic Freedom. I think many people would be surprised to know that he understands these things very well. And I know he was asked several times leading up to his retirement from the Federal Reserve whether he still held those views, and he said that he certainly did. When he was asked follow-up questions that along the lines of, then how could you possibly take the position you do and do what you do with the Federal Reserve, and he just refused to answer those questions. Yeah,
I think he basically just sold out for the fame and glory.
I think that's right, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ayn Rand said that about him early on, that you got to watch that one. He likes the lights, he likes the limelight. So that might have been a portent of things to come.
Yeah. So you moved down to Uruguay about 4 years ago. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and your views from sort of an anarcho-capitalist perspective on doing business down there?
Sure. I didn't necessarily move down there for business purposes because it was a better tax climate or a better business climate necessarily. Although at the time it was advertised as sort of a banking haven of sorts, and it was. But they've sort of gone the other way on that, and it's becoming less and less so. But I did, I moved down there initially because I had a love of travel in general, and I had always wanted to live abroad and, spent time in France when I was in college and that kind of thing. So I've always had this sort of wanderlust, and just decided I wanted to, if I was ever going to do it, I needed to go ahead, and if I was ever going to move abroad, I needed to go ahead and do it. And that caused me to, start doing some homework on where I might want to live. And so, by visiting places and going through sort of a process of elimination, South America became high on my list, and then slowly but surely Uruguay began to rise to the top. And after a while, and friends of mine were going along that same path, and I was conferring with them, and so slowly but surely Uruguay began to rise to the top, and eventually made a decision to move down there.
That's great, and yeah, I've heard the same things about Uruguay, that they used to be quite a bit better, and they've been getting a little bit worse now with bank privacy and taxes and things of that nature.
That's right. I mean, most people don't know much about Uruguay, and but it, although it is a republic and has a president and a legislature and all of those kinds of things, they just elected a communist president So it's an eclectic, kind of a strange place.
Yeah, it's always interesting down in South America with their politics.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It is very interesting.
Yeah, with Cristina in Argentina and Hugo, who's apparently on his deathbed right now in Venezuela.
That's right. And you probably know this, but Santiago or Chile rather, is considered one of the more business-friendly places in the world. And so far, that's been my experience in terms of rubbing shoulders with people who do business there and those kinds of things. So, Chile might be a bright spot amidst all of these things.
Yeah, I really think it is, and that's why we started up Galt's Chile down in just outside of Santiago. And yeah, so we're trying to attract more libertarian, freedom-minded people, anarchists, to come down there and move there and start a little community. And definitely the things in Chile are very exciting because the government, for the most part, stays out of the way, even though they do some strange things every now and then, like all governments do, but there's not a lot of large taxation, there's not a lot of major regulation. Their central bank even isn't a Keynesian central bank, they're Friedmanites, and so that's a little bit better. Like, there's no good central bank.
That's right, but it's a little bit better. Their mindset's a little better.
Yeah, it's a little bit better, and that's all we can ask for in today's day and age. It's not many countries out there where there's a lot of freedom and opportunity. Chile is probably one of the only ones, and then there's some in Asia that I like. I like Singapore, a very low tax rate. They have a lot of regulations, but they don't really, they have that old thing, you're not allowed to chew gum. But they don't really, there's not people going around looking for people chewing gum or anything. So it's just sort of weird. There's no perfect place at all. But I've been to Uruguay, and I like it quite a bit. Especially Punta del Este. Is that where you live?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where I live. Yeah.
Yeah, and you rub shoulders with people like Doug Casey at cocktail parties there. Is that what you do?
Yes. I hung out with Doug. Had a cigar and single malt scotch with him. It's a nice place too. Visually, it's just appealing place to wake up in the morning and look out at the ocean, and it's got a lot of different scenery. It's got lagoons and farmland and forests and sand dunes and all these kind of contrasting landscapes, which I like landscapes, and just kind of a nice life there around Punta del Este.
Yeah, it's nice and quiet, tranquil, but it does have some nightlife in certain times of the year, so that's nice too.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the nightlife's not non-existent, and then of course you get crazy months during the summer of December through February, which is a madhouse. So, so you have a little bit of both worlds. Yeah,
that's great. So it's interesting. So you never really even knew about anarcho-capitalism or anything. You'd just been living it on your own, and you sort of fell kind of backwards into it, figuring out what it all is.
Well, that's exactly right. To be honest, I've only just become familiar with the term, I would say, over the last couple of years. And, the sort of basic definition about, individual sovereignty and free markets, that's me 100%. So, yeah, you're right. I fit the definition, didn't know the term.
That's great. Yeah, I was sort of the same thing. Doug Casey was the first one who even told me I was a libertarian or an anarchist.
Oh, there you go.
And I'd never even heard the word libertarian before he told me about it. So
that's interesting. That's right. That's right.
So since you've found out about it, has there been anything you've read or anything that you kind of like that we should tell people about who might be interested more in anarcho-capitalism? I have a book list, a lengthy one that I distribute to friends and when people get interested, sort of and that's all the basics. I know there are books that you've heard of. Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, I believe it's called, is a great place to start. There's The Road to Serfdom by F.A. Hayek. That's fantastic. I can't think of the titles, but Murray Rothbard is another great place where he's written a lot, but essentially are essays, but they're in book form. So they're not lengthy books, not very difficult to understand, and they cover everything: money, the banking history of the United States, central banks, the whole deal. So Murray Rothbard's another great person to read. And of course, if for the intellectually minded and those who have a lot of discipline to read big, thick books, if you want to read, Mies, he's the father of all this stuff, of Austrian economics. And I believe his book is The Theory of Money and Credit. That's probably more advanced. Maybe you should read some of the other books first before you take that one. Yeah, definitely. I love Mises, and I read a lot about what people write about what he said, but I have a trouble getting through his books. They're just
They are very tough. I would say, The Theory of Money and Credit is probably his most understandable. I have read things that he has written in the past, and it's not all down to just, the intellectual speak. Some of it is down to the context and the time in which he was, speaking. Some of that understanding is a little bit lost in the way we speak today. So it can be very difficult.
Yeah, Murray Rothbard's a lot easier to read. He's
a lot easier. That's right.
That's a good place to start. I think he was the first person who coined the term anarcho-capitalist, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you might be right, but somebody of his ilk and timing, but he might be the one.
Yeah. So at the Frontier Research Report, what kind of stuff do you write about?
It's an investment newsletter. I have a business and finance background. I mentioned earlier that I was raised in an entrepreneurial household, and that sort of led to a business and finance career with a couple of boutique consulting firms in Los Angeles. So that gave me a pretty solid background and ability to look at companies and environmental climates and look at markets and those kinds of things. And I've also been a long-time natural resource investor. So lately, over the last 3 or 4 years, I combined it all together to focus my skill set on natural resources and in the form of an investment newsletter for investors. And so I focus too on sort of the high risk, high reward segments of natural resources, which is exploration. I primarily focus on gold, but not only gold. I look at uranium and esoteric things like potash, which most people have never heard of, oil. So I cover the gamut, but I like gold a lot, and I think people should be have a significant exposure to gold. So in addition to owning gold, physical gold, and in addition to perhaps investing in some of the major producers, which are sort of blue chip household names in the gold sector, I also believe in people having some explosive exposure to the high risk, high reward exploration sector.
Yeah, I believe the same thing. I do the exact same thing at the Dollar Vigilante. We write about gold and precious metals and also the stocks, and we mostly focus on the junior stocks as well. I think that's where the most value can be found, and you're a perfect person to ask. What's your thoughts on the last few years in this sector? It's been pretty downtrodden and very undervalued compared to gold.
That's exactly right. It's not doing what it's supposed to. Neither are the producers. They're not necessarily leveraging gold the way one might have expected with the bull market in the gold price that began 2000, 2001. It did initially. The stock prices of both producers and explorers did very well. But I'd say since 2007 and the onset of the global financial crisis, they've struggled to keep pace and have declined despite the fact that the gold prices continue to rise. It's been, I think and then we've had a severe downward, spiral since I think just before Fukushima. So that would have been March, April 2011. And prices have really suffered despite the fact that the gold price has held on fairly well. And has really, the gold price has been in positive territory, I think, for the last 12 years running. And most of the time, it's between 15 and 25% gains per year. And its slow years, it's been like 5%, 7%, that kind of thing. I think I haven't looked at the actual return last year. It might have been just 5 or 7% there too. So the gold bull is very much intact. The dynamics that created the gold bull are more powerfully intact today than they were when the gold bull began. And so it is proving difficult for some investors to understand how gold, the stock prices for the gold producers and for the explorers could be, falling while the gold price is holding its own and rising. Some of that has to do with especially with the juniors, the high risk, high reward nature of it all, and the fact that capital markets outside the gold sector are suffering substantially, which is where most people are invested. And so, capital for the more sort of esoteric gold markets dries up quickly when people are struggling in other markets.
Yeah, and I also think it's partially because gold has risen, but the expenses of all these things that these mining companies have to do have risen almost just as much, which has really caused a lot of problems. But do you expect 2013 to be a better year for the juniors?
I'm not sure. It has the potential to be. I expect, if you wanted to, ask me my sort of global view, I expect eventually the gap between the value of the gold price and the valuations of the producers and explorers to I expect the producers and explorers to eventually catch up. And I expect that in the medium term, I'll say, between now and 3 to 5 years, But what can happen in 2013? I'm not 100% sure. Just because there are explosive dynamics under the gold price, which should make investors in the producers and explorers very bullish, unless and until that manifests itself in the gold price, I'm not sure that the stock sectors will become any more attractive. Maybe a shorter way to say that is until the gold price reaches and surpasses its previous high, I think, which was achieved somewhere around 1875 to 1925, back in September of 2011. Until the gold price surpasses that, convincing everyone that the gold bull is still alive and well, perhaps we won't see capital flooding back into these stocks, which is not a bad thing for investors.
Yeah, you think so? It's not a bad thing that capital doesn't flow back into these stocks?
Not immediately, because it gives people an opportunity to stock up on on companies where the intrinsic value is extremely high. A lot of extremely, valuable companies a lot of very strong companies are extremely undervalued right now. So you have companies, for example, that have definitive feasibility studies. They've discovered a deposit, they've proven it up, they've proven that it's commercially viable. They've got this definitive feasibility study, which now banks can now invest in building the mine, these kinds of things, and these things usually add tremendous value. So investors in these companies where that happens typically can experience 200% to 1,000% gains just based on that kind of achieving that kind of milestone. And we have several companies lately that have achieved that kind of milestone, and not only do their stocks not rise, but they sometimes fall. So, and I think there's very little risk in picking up many of these companies. And so it's a good time for investors to do, bargain shopping.
Yeah, the last time that it was like this, in my opinion, was 2008, 2009. And I did a fair amount of buying at that time. And yeah, there was one stock I bought a private placement, it was a company called Copper Fox. I don't know if you know the company, but private placement was at 8 cents with a full warrant. It's at 10 cents, I believe, and it's about $2 right now. So, yeah, these can be very, very profitable if you get in at the right time. And I think, like you're saying, the right time is right now. It's probably not going to get a lot worse. It really can't get much worse.
No, that's right. And this, by the way, it's the absolute best time. Because of the high risk inherent in investing in exploration companies. You want to buy the stocks as cheaply as possible. You want to be able to identify well-researched, well-managed, well-run companies, number one. And then you want to place your money with these guys because they know what they're doing. But you want to do it at the cheapest price possible because the risk is very high. Even when you have extremely good managers with strong projects, a lot of cash, in very strong jurisdictions, when you have all of those things lined up, there's still high risk. And so the only way to mitigate that high risk is to buy very cheaply. So this is a gift to those who understand these markets. The time to buy is when these companies are shunned completely, and the intrinsic value is fairly high. And then you want to be selling to those who are, trend buyers, those who wait until stocks are rising steeply, and then everyone's flooding into the market. You want somebody most beginners in this business, right? They buy their first stock when it's very popular already and it's trending higher, and then they make money. But they're typically not asking who's buying who's selling them the stock that they're buying. And the true, building true wealth in this business means you're the one who's buying when nobody wants these things, and you're the one selling when people can't get enough.
Yep, buy low, sell high, and
yes, exactly.
yeah, and these stocks are just notorious for having incredible highs and also incredible lows, as we've seen numerous times over the last 12 years.
That's right. And if I could toss along that line, if I could toss in an important note there, how you invest in these things is very important as well. And there's a lot of sort of tricks of the trade that go along with how you invest in something that, even though could potentially be very valuable, but can drop 70% in the space of a couple of weeks or a couple of months. You can't just take a position and hold it. There's some proactive steps you need to take that will allow you to survive the downtimes.
Yeah, it's definitely a roller coaster ride on those stocks.
Certainly is.
Definitely not something you want to put all your money into, but yeah, I consider them almost like lottery tickets to some extent. So, you know, if you have 15, 20, or even if you're a gambler, 30% of your capital and you want to put it into these things. Yes. But I wouldn't risk it all on junior stocks.
Well said, and it probably should be said.
Yeah, I'm actually headed up to the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference next week, January 20th, 21. And there's about 10,000 people attend that show and about 600 public companies, so that should be interesting. And I'm sure the mood will be a little bit dour, which is, like you said, it's good for investors like us who are trying to get as cheap as possible and then wait for the rocket ride.
That's right. And you'll notice, I mean, I would suspect Rick Rule will be there. Of Sprott, and he'll probably have a smile on his face. He loves times like this.
Yeah, he loves times like this. He hates it when the prices are high.
That's right. That's right.
Although he's making a fortune when that happens.
That's right. And he just, yeah, that's right. He, you know, he looks for things that are dirt cheap and looks for the intrinsic value, and then he just piles into the things and waits.
Yeah, and that's the way to play it. So maybe you can tell people where they can find your newsletter, the Frontier Research Report.
Yes, it's a lengthy title, but if you type it into Google, it'll be easy to find. My name, obviously, Carlos Andres, and the newsletter is the Frontier Research Report, and the web address is frontierresearchreport.com. That's
great. Well, thanks for taking the time in probably overcast England to spend some time with us today.
No, I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's snowing here, actually. So. Oh. No, but Jeff, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks very much. That's Carlos Andres of the Frontier Research Report, and this has been Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.